Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at Ask Adam Torres to keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Adam Simons on the line, and he's an investor, advisor, and board member to companies and startups all around the world. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm excited about today's topic. So we're going to talk about some trends you're seeing for early stage startups and some tips for founders. But before we do that, let's get into what you're doing as an investor, advisor, and board member. Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just by way of background, my career was spent kind of in the early years in strategy consulting, working with big blue chip Fortune 500 companies in a variety of disciplines and industries and verticals, really kind of cut my teeth in a lot of areas of business. Then was a co-founder myself of a startup back during what is now known as Web 1.0. Was at an agency for a bit and then spent the better part of about 13 years in industry at big companies doing strategy, doing operations, doing transactional work. And then about 8 years ago, really as just a side hustle in the early days, started this little practice, which was never meant to be more than literally this side hustle, where had a couple friends, say, from business school that had projects. And I said, great, let's go to a coffee shop. Let's roll up our sleeves. If I can add value, maybe I'll become an advisor to your company, take a bit of equity. Really wasn't thinking bigger things at that time. Year two, started to write some angel-sized checks in some of those companies. Started to become pretty deeply networked in the VC and PE community around the United States and later globally. And fast forward now, where this practice, which originally just sort of started as a hobby or a side hustle, is now full-time pursuit. So working with these companies, these startups and emerging companies all over the world, no 2 days are the same. And I'll give you kind of one of my favorite stories where a couple weeks ago, the Monday of my week was spent in a pretty heady negotiation, unfortunately regarding a recapitalization of a company that took hours and hours and was pretty in the weeds and pretty detailed as it related to corporate finance and kind of the impact to shareholders. The Tuesday was spent with a phone call from a very early stage startup that I work with on the East Coast, who kind of said, hey, Adam, the startup down the hall, they just went out of business and we really like their conference room table. We can't figure out how to fit it in our door. So I went from a Monday of a really heady kind of sophisticated negotiation to a Tuesday helping 3 26-year-olds fit a table through a door. And that pretty much sums up the variety that I see on a week-to-week basis in the work that I do.
Oh man, that's awesome! I love that story. Let's talk about. I mean, you have a unique vantage point, being in business as long as you have, and with the types of companies you work with.
Adam, are you calling me old now? I don't know. You're trying to date me.
Oh, possibly. For the people listening, maybe. If they're still in college, definitely. You're over the hill then. Sorry, Adam. From one over the hill Adam to another. It is what it is. So let's get into to startup trends. I mean, what do you notice in the startup space right now?
Yeah, so we're definitely in a cycle now. As much as I hate that word, I'll use it just for understanding. We're in a cycle now where certainly investment is becoming tighter at the front end of the startup funnel, which means it's harder and harder for earlier stage companies, and particularly first-time founders, to properly capitalize their business. Two, I think you're finally seeing the reckoning that a lot of us have wanted for a while, where the projects that aren't real companies, don't have viable business models, don't have a pathway to profitability within a reasonable time frame, are kind of being weeded out from the marketplace. And I actually think that's a very positive thing. When I deal with founders, either as an investor, advisor, or particularly as a board member, there's a few tips that I ask the founders to really deeply think about as they get into their projects. And the first one kind of relates to that last point, and it's to build something real that can actually make money. So I think, in very heady times in the startup world, you tend to have these projects that emerge that are just relying on the backstop of a very quick exit. You see this particularly in high technology, not so much in other verticals. And I'm an investor across many different verticals these days. But you can't do that. You've got to build something that can endure for a period of time and can ultimately be a real business that makes money. The second tip is be tight with your cash. Too often, money is just spent on dumb things in startups and emerging companies. It's no problem overspending on things like marketing to drive awareness or building the appropriate staff and infrastructure for your company. But if I go to meet a startup at a WeWork and the first thing the founder does in the elevator bay is offer me cold brew coffee, I kind of scratch my head and I'm like, what's going on here? This isn't the way that we traditionally built businesses really for the past 100 years. It's a very strange bubble in startup land. And so the analogy I'm giving founders now is, now that we're in the kind of new roaring 20s, is remember back to the last roaring 20s and remember those great titans of business. Those guys were about as frugal as it comes in terms of being tight with their cash, and that's a really good approach to running a business. The third, and this is a little bit controversial in startup land, is bootstrap as long as you can. Beg, borrow, steal, call your second cousin 3 times removed to become a small-time investor in your company if you need a little bit of outside capital. But don't view venture capital investment as the goal. Venture capital should be a last resort, not a first port of call for a startup. I think many founders are kind of naive to the terms that VCs bring to the table, which are not going to be founder-friendly most of the time, and really just sort of naive to the dilution, naive to the voting rights they'll give up, et cetera. So really try to keep your own project as long as you can. Just a little data point there, 98% of startups in the world never take a dollar from a venture capitalist. So just keep that in mind when you think about the prototypical Silicon Valley image of a startup. It's not necessarily representative of startups around the world. The fourth is know your why, right? The odds are you are not going to become Mark Zuckerberg with your project, right? Just the odds dictate that. So if that's not going to happen, you need to have a strong reason why you're going to work every day, why you continue grinding against this project to make it a success. It's a lot of hours, and it's a lot of both time away from your friends or family or just, frankly, other business contacts. And it's a lot of just mental grind. And so you have to have a really strong purpose and know why you're doing what you're doing versus just, oh, yeah, I want to do this for 2 years and then exit this business. And then the last, and I think this is really where it relates to a lot of the work that I've been doing, particularly on the advisory side of my practice, is ask for help. You've got a lot of entrepreneurs now and frankly, companies that are going from what I call hero to zero because they don't look externally and they don't bring in those battle-tested pros that can really challenge the assumptions and can help them break out of the picture frame that they're in. A lot of just sort of talking into an echo chamber within a particular startup versus bringing in some folks that will bring real-world common sense, challenge the status quo within the organization, and frankly, challenge founders to get better as business people.
No, I love it. I mean, it's all great, solid advice. So, Adam, if somebody's listening to this and they want more information, I mean, what kind of things are you looking for now? I mean, investor, advisor, board member, a lot of different hats. Why would somebody listening to this, or why should they contact you? What kind of things do you want to work on?
I think there's 3 things that are pretty important. Number one is the companies that I typically will work with Usually the path is I'll start on an advisory capacity, get to know the founders a bit, and then ultimately make a decision about an investment from there. That's not always true, but that's usually sort of the way it works out. The projects need to be, at some sense, quote unquote, venture scale. So these, I don't look for just lifestyle businesses. Those are awesome businesses to be in. It's just not what I do. So someone with kind of a venture scale aspiration for their business, someone that frankly is looking for an easy button within their business. Typically you see founders with really strong spikes in certain areas of a business, be it in the product space or the scientific space or in the technology space, but you don't necessarily have founders, particularly younger founders, that are able to put all the pieces together for a viable, growing business. So that's sort of where I come in, having been a general manager in my career, having led businesses, understanding what it takes to grow beyond just, the baseline of a particular piece of science or a product. So someone that is looking for that counsel within the organization. I kind of call it, even though, this would really date me out. I mean, I kind of call it the gray hair counsel within the organization. Not that I have gray hair, thankfully, but that's sort of what I'm referring to. And then the last piece is folks that need help envisioning how to strategically plan for either go-to-market or capital raise or kind of those bigger, meaty things that happen periodically within a business. Certainly see a lot of people come my way with questions around that. What I don't do, though, I am not a finder. I will not go out and, raise venture capital for a startup. It's not a good use of time. Certainly, if I'm affiliated with an organization, absolutely. If there's a deal to be had, I will share it within my network. But, the kind of downside of what I do is there's a lot of outreach there where all folks want is X, portion of my time to go out and, quote unquote, raise capital for them. Not only is that an SEC violation, but it's just not a good use of anyone's time. I'd rather my founders focus on building amazing companies.
Awesome. So, Adam, what's the best way for somebody to reach out?
Right now, LinkedIn is kind of my main platform. I am propping up a website this quarter. So by the end of March, I'll make an announcement on LinkedIn about getting people over to kind of a new hub that I'll vertically integrate and have a lot of great content there. Folks will be able to schedule appointments with me on that website. So I'd say right now, link in with me, see some of the content that I'm producing there. I'm fairly active participant in the LinkedIn community. And then by the end of March, look for that announcement about the website. And certainly never feel awkward, I should say, about reaching out to me. I'm very open about having conversations with folks. I always learn a lot. Hopefully other folks learn a lot too. And, it's hard to build a business, and we're all in this together. So certainly feel free to lean on me as a resource as you prop up your business.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Adam, been awesome having you on the show today and catching up and getting a feel for startup trends you're noticing and tips for our founders out there, because you're right, it is difficult to build a business. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. I hope you got a lot of value out of this. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you had fun listening, because we had fun making this for you. If you did, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a review on the Apple iTunes Store. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, give us a subscribe there and let us know what you thought. Love to hear some comments there, and let's take the conversation over to the YouTube community. And Adam, thanks again for coming on the show.